Thank you.
Next, we're going to dive deeper into how data and technology, specifically AI, can be used for risk reduction globally. So, first, here's a video from the UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction on the importance of early warning systems ahead of extreme weather events.
We heard that a hurricane was coming. I didn't know how large it was at the time.
The roof was caving in on you, and it was just blowing away. It was just, you just seeing sands just in circles around you.
তো বা দাদাসে বুড়া মানুষ যারা আছে তারা তুন অন্য একটা আশ্রয় লইতে কিও হষ্ট বা দে প্রেগনেন্ট মেলা পয়েন্ট থাকে তারা তুনে কিও হষ্ট আর গুড়া পয়েন্ট যারা আছে বাস্টে মা গুড়া পয়েন্টত আছে বহুত কিছু ফানিত ফুরি যার কইতে আছে
Millions of people around the world are blindsided by extreme weather each year. They have no idea when a potentially deadly hazard is just minutes away. Cyclones, droughts, wildfires, and heat waves affect the poor and vulnerable the most. We often hear that disasters are natural, but that's wrong. Our actions can reduce our vulnerability and exposure. That's why we must prepare better.
We firmly believe that human decisions are the largest contributors to disaster risk, and we have the power to stop disasters from devastating. That is the good news.
We can stop hazards from becoming disasters by helping those most at risk adapt, mitigate, and become more resilient. By funding early warning systems, by investing in resilient infrastructure and social safety nets, by learning from local communities who have experienced extreme weather for millennia.
Extreme weather events will happen, but they do not need to become deadly disasters.
We're continuing our conversation now about using data and AI for global risk reduction. In our previous segment, we detailed the extent and scope of crises right now: hunger, poverty displacement caused by climate disasters, and conflict. Let's turn now to the technology itself. Vilas Dhar is president and trustee of the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. Melinda Bohannon is Director General of Humanitarian Development at the UK's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. Mami Mizutori is Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, and Amandeep Singh Gill is the UN Envoy on Technology. Welcome. What a pleasure to have you all here for this block. So, Mami, I'd like to start with you. I want you to address and talk about the video we just watched. Explain what the Early Warnings for All initiative is and how the UN is going to get early warnings for everybody by 2027?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, so this is the Secretary General's ambitious but important initiative, because this saves lives and livelihoods. If you have a 24-hour before the disaster warning, you can save up to 30% of economic loss. And importantly, mortality is 8 times less. But only half of the world right now have what we call an effective multi-hazard early warning system, which is end-to-end and also reaches the last mile, so reaches the most vulnerable people. And we need to change this situation. Now, this is what we're doing with the whole UN system, because this is about humanity, development, and stability. And it's really important that we're doing this week.
So early warnings for what kinds of disasters, and how are you doing it?
So it's multi-hazard, and it's not a one fit for all. We're going to go to the countries and see what are your hazards. Some countries face earthquakes, tsunamis, plus all the climate. And then we also look at the vulnerability, because the vulnerability is different according to the development level. And we see the exposure. And then we say, what do you need? So here's where the data comes in, very important. And then we now have 30 countries, which we will start the initiative with. There was a lot of support yesterday at the Climate Ambition Summit.
All right, Amandeep, you want to speak to how this data flows in and the other data that is most important for the UN reaching its goals?
In this initiative, there are 4 important pillars. There's the knowledge management pillar that Mami and UNDRR lead on. And then there is the analytics and assessments pillar, which the World Meteorological Organization leads on. So near real-time data coming together across different streams to give us the assessments that are needed for those kind of warnings. So that is important. And then there is the side of communications, effective communications, where the International Telecommunications Union is on the lead, and then preparedness and response. So it's a multi-institutional effort, and data is really the foundation of it. And at the UN, we are enabling the coming together of high quality data in real time by working at the governance level, by working on investments. So for instance, the CRAFT fund, the Complex Risk Analytics Fund, where data comes together. And then we are also working on building up of the capacity, so the expertise across the world, particularly in those countries, as Mami pointed out, those who are left out of these kind of multi-hazard early warning systems.
But, okay, when I think multi-institutional effort and I think speed, I don't think of those things going together. So give me a specific example of data source that you're able to work with across institutions to then specifically provide a warning that is useful in a country.
So the best example is the hunger map, which the World Food Programme leads on with help from others. So across 90 countries, 700 to 800 million people who are at risk of food insecurity. So we are able to get assessments about where food insecurity is going to spike next, and that allows us to respond in a better way. And that's enabled at the back end by CRAFT, because CRAFT has this data set on conflicts, and that's a major factor in food insecurity. So we have to make all these things work in near real time.
Melinda, will you explain how you're using data in your humanitarian work? What are some of the most interesting use cases that you have, and what is the data that does not exist right now that will be useful to you?
So very much in the vein of what I think we've just heard from these two participants. So fundamentally, we use data in partnership for better targeting and also better foresight. So I'll give you 5 examples briefly. Targeting is really critical, using data for ways to get response and support directly to community level. So for example, we've used a web-based analytics fund in order to track need for safer water and target chlorination interventions effectively. On climate, we've worked with NASA scientists to understand climate predictions, climate forecasts, and where impact is likely to take place, and make sure that we're targeting interventions there. In humanitarian, we've used AI-driven models using widespread data to track cholera outbreaks, for example, in very poor countries. In conflict and crises, we've used AI-driven models to track media and conflict events and human rights abuses, and understand where conflicts are likely to break out. So we have that element of predictability in our policy and our program responses. And specifically on human rights, we're able to use data to target, to understand and track what's going on human rights abuses in a way that supports accountability measures.
So explain how you're able to use data to anticipate where a conflict will break out. What data stream are you looking at?
Open source data, media reports, other kind of data online which might show where there's violence breaking out, where people are concerned, where people are worried about extremist activity, and use that to model in effect where we can think or predict, if we understand, looking at those trends and mapping them and comparing them to trends in the past, where local level conflict is likely to break out, or local level violence.
Vilas, one of your projects is to try to decrease the gap, the technology gap between people in the world who have access to the world's greatest technology and the folks who do not. Do you believe that we're solving this problem in a way that is getting technology spread more equitably, which could certainly help with all the problems that we've been discussing here?
Well, Nick, I'm an optimist, and I want to answer your question with a yes. But let me start from a different place.
Answer fully honestly.
Yeah. And look, I'm often asked, am I worried about it? I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not worried about it. I am outraged. Outraged. If we live in a world where our values around inclusion and participation, when we know that 60% of GDP is being driven by digital participation, and then we say that 2 billion plus people on this planet don't even have basic access,
right?
That's something we should all be outraged about. And I know it's one that we all share here. But there's 3 elements to this digital divide that we have to talk about. The first is connectivity, and it's a problem that will not be solved by market-based forces, which means we need to step in with public capital, with regulatory action, with the idea that access is a fundamental right and not something to be solved by delivering a last-mile piece of fiber or a connectivity, right? The second is a data gap that really is exacerbating inequality. The fact is the data we collect today is often the data that is commercially viable. When we look at climate and we think about global financing flows towards carbon reduction, we see that the data we have access to is what's already being collected because it leads to optimization of shipping chains or logistics. What about the pieces of data that reflect community values and community experiences of carbon emissions? We again need to step into that with multilateral institutions, with public capital, with philanthropy, to say, let's ascertain the data we should be collecting, not merely the data that we have. And the third is technical capacity. We live in a world where AI is in every headline, and we absolutely acknowledge that the vast majority of AI capacity is held in private sector tech companies. This is in and of itself a digital divide. We spend a lot of time and energy at the Patrick McGovern Foundation thinking about how we move technical capacity into communities. Broad-based skilling, training programs, and creating new incentives for people to stay inside of community-oriented institutions and multilaterals instead of just signing up for that big paycheck and going to build technology for profit.
So how specifically do you do that? Let's talk about number three, because it's fabulous work, and I think one of the most important things in the world, which is making data accessible to all instead of just within private companies.
So delighted to work with institutions like UNESCO and across the UN system, including
this guy?
under Amandeep's incredible leadership on these topics. To ask questions like, how do we train 25 million women and girls in partnership with an organization called Technovation around the world in communities and traditionally underrepresented peoples, to bring them into a world where they have AI capacity and maturity? We work with the indigenous communities all around the world. With Michael Runningwolf, who I was proud to bring to the UN on Sunday to speak to an audience about what it looks like to grow up on a Cheyenne reservation in Montana with no power or running water, and 20-odd years later to be a global AI expert. These are the examples that reframe what it means to be a technologist. Not merely to sit through college courses, but to say technology solves a problem that's in our lived experience. That is a community that's facing these drastic effects of climate change and don't need to rely on a global data mechanism, but instead need early warnings, need things like how do we know if there's a landslide coming that's going to hit our village, and build IoT-driven information mechanisms that give those warnings to the community when they're needed.
Let me, any of the three of you can answer this. I'm fascinated by number two, that we're essentially collecting the wrong data. Right? We are collecting data because it's available, but maybe it's for shipping, maybe it's for infrastructure, maybe it's in the service of capitalism and not actually in the service of communities. Do any of you three want to comment on that? Do you think he's right or do you think he's wrong?
I think absolutely right, because we need to work on flagship gold standard data sets in these areas where existing public-private data sets are not enough. So fresh effort is needed, and that needs to be linked to capacity development, bring more people into the data for development equation. That's the idea behind the Secretary General's proposal on building new data and AI commons for the SDGs and creating a capacity development network around the globe that trains 1 million champions, digital champions for the SDGs, 250,000 of them in Africa. I think that's the key area. Data capacity and human capacity, doing it together.
And what data is going in exactly into the Global Fund?
So take agriculture and food security, the example I referred to earlier. We need new data sets on how farmers are adapting to changes induced by the shift in our climate landscape. So bring those data sets together, run analytics on them, and be more smart about climate change resilient agriculture.
Nick, if I may, about
Please.
disaster risk reduction, I think we need information data on the hazards that you're facing, on the vulnerability, who are the people, what are the vulnerabilities in your country, and then exposure, because asset is what is destroyed by disasters. But then you also need data on the losses and damages, and not only an aggregated one. Where did the loss and damage happen? What caused it? And unless countries don't have this kind of data, then they don't know how to build their resilience. And these data, you also need the capacity building that everybody's talking about, because policymakers in small countries, in small cities, if they can't translate this data into their policy and have what we call risk-informed policies, then again, we can't build resilience.
Linda, what would be the data that is most valuable to you that you don't have access to right now?
I mean, I think I'd approach it slightly differently. It's not about accessibility to data, because there is a great deal of data sets that we've used in development over many years, right down to the household level, about where poverty exists and where development progress is off track. I think that the key thing for me is the inclusivity of data, because you need to make sure, particularly when governments or organisations are thinking about targeting their responses, that they're not leaving populations out. They're not discriminating on the basis of age or ethnicity or geography. It really needs to be comprehensive, inclusive. People collecting data need to be accountable for the comprehensiveness of it, the accuracy of it, and making sure when you're modelling, you're using AI techniques, you're using web-based analytics, that in effect you're not leaving anyone out. So my area of concern is less the availability, it's more how it's used and its connection to rights and democracy.
Have you seen data being used in a way that undermines rights and democracy that has worried you?
I've seen partial data sets which haven't necessarily been deliberately made partial, but it's quite clear, I think, when you're thinking about a climate impact or a natural hazard or a disease outbreak, that you really need to be thinking through the implications for political economy, the implications for conflict. So it's sort of, we just need more capability and understanding and more fluency in how we use the data sets that we've got.
All right, Vilas, this is a moment where the world is gathered. We're all here in New York. Everybody is talking about AI. What do you hope happens in the next week, in the next month, to start to really solve these problems more efficiently than we have before?
Three things that I think are absolutely critical. The first is in 2024, we're entering a period where a majority of humanity will go out to the polls and try to elect democratic leadership. And in that world, AI and data are going to play an integral role. In many ways, I hope to support democracy. In some ways, that will create real risks.
Right.
This week, we need to come together to understand what it means when we talk about data collection and AI, and how we will, as a community and as a society, regulate those risks. The second, I think, is the incredible work that's being led here at the UN to move beyond the missing middle of AI. Instead of thinking only about short-term risks and long-term risks, to think about the middle where we build pro-social applications of these tools that really bring together incredible data sets, but say we will learn what the risks are as we deploy them with communities as co-architects. And that'll happen through mechanisms like the new high-level advisory board on AI, as well as the incredible work that's happening across these institutions. The third and most maybe important one is it's time for us to have a new public reckoning and a conversation about basic values of inclusion and participation. I'm not going to say that AI is in any way going to fix our conversation, but if it gives us a new lens to interrogate our own biases, to start a public conversation that talks about digital literacy, and to come back to that core question of the digital divide, that's the call for world leaders that are here this week. Let's start the conversation there. Let's name it with moral intention, and then let's figure out what we do about it.
Why would AI do that? I mean, why would a conversation about AI lead to that conversation?
It's my favorite question, Nick, because for the first time, we have a new shiny object that everybody's focused on. It's in every headline. What it gives us the opportunity to do is use that as an entry point to a conversation that says, who owns technical capacity and the economic opportunities that are attached to it? Who owns decision-making about the moral risks that we all face as we jump into a conversation about deployment or creation? And it raises a fundamental question about governance. Who governs? Not just AI, but a whole series of interlocked global conversations that we need to have.
And you don't worry. So we have these conversations about who governs, who has rights, ethics. We've been having them. Suddenly this huge shiny object appears. And your hope is that the shiny object makes us have better conversations? Don't you think it could just make us not have those conversations?
I am deeply hopeful that it's the Trojan horse. It gets everybody in the room to talk about AI, and then it lets us say, hey, wait, we don't actually have the kinds of infrastructures and developed maturity on these topics that we want to have. Let's take a step back and build them together.
Amandeep, you think this is going to happen?
Yes, it's like doing jujitsu with this. Use this opportunity. And there is a bigger opportunity next year with the Summit of the Future. Leaders are going to come together, and it's an opportunity to reboot multilateralism, reboot multi-stakeholder cooperation. And digital data and AI are relatively, I mean, I'm not discounting the geopolitics, and you were speaking with Ian earlier, that's always there. It's a relatively less contentious area. So it's an opportunity. I won't call it a Trojan horse, but maybe it's a leveraging opportunity.
Mami, do you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. So I think what is important is the trust element, because we can use, going back to early warning, we can use a lot of data, we can use AI and have a very good early warning system. But if the people don't trust the information or the warning that they get from it, then people will not take early action. So this is the thing. And one more thing I would say is that when I go out to the communities, a lot of people say early warning for all, that's great. Technology, that's great. but think about the indigenous knowledge, the traditional knowledge, and think about how you can combine the innovative and the traditional. And I think this is not only cliche. I think it's very important for the communities to combine this. And if you can't do it, it's very difficult to convince the people that this data AI is going to save your life.
Last thought?
So I'm also incredibly optimistic about the potential of AI for human advancement, and I think we hear that consistently from people that really know about it. But I think we also need to be eyes wide open that there are significant risks. The trust, the bias, the way in which it's applied. So the safety aspect is really important. Now, we as practitioners, we're not all experts on this. This is new to all of us, right? And I think there's something about the honesty of the approach, the humility of the approach, the sort of focusing on the downsides, the sort of getting out ahead of the risk early and understanding it. But in doing so, also being imaginative and creative and optimistic about the role of AI in health, education for the poorest. We've got to do both at the same time.
All right, thank you so much. Amandeep Singh Gill, Vilas Dhar, Melinda Bohannon, Mami Mizutori, thank you so much. Head of this program, Global Partners submitted messages of support for the data initiative we're discussing today. Here's some of what they have to say.
The German government is significantly ramping up its investments in better data-driven early warning and early action in our national conflict prevention and disaster risk reduction work, for example, by developing a climate conflict vulnerability index and through multilateral initiatives such as the Complex Risk Analytics Fund. In 2023, we remain the largest contributor to CRAFT, and we are delighted that the donor base is expanding rapidly. We have committed ourselves to spend at least 5% of our overall humanitarian budget on anticipatory humanitarian action. By supporting initiatives like the Anticipation Hub and Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, we are also strongly committed to the work towards better international coordination of efforts regarding smarter and faster anticipatory action. Secondly, the German government has set up internal procedures to strengthen data governance. For example, we have recently updated the German federal data strategy, putting emphasis on enhancing data usage, improving data literacy, and increasing the volume of open data. To fulfill these objectives, every ministry, including the Federal Foreign Office, has set up a data lab. Thirdly and finally, effective multilateral governance is crucial to harness the full potential of data and new technologies like AI for the SDGs, climate action, crisis anticipation, and the greater public good, and ensure their safe, just, and inclusive global use. To this end, we actively support the multi-stakeholder process of developing a United Nations Global Digital Compact and the work of the Secretary General and the Envoy on Technology on setting up a high-level advisory body on artificial intelligence. Despite all progress we made, current technologies breakthroughs still hold a lot of untapped potential. Harnessing that potential is a common task and goal. Today's event is an excellent sign that we are on the right track. I thank you.
Since 2014, the EU conflict early warning system has built on quantitative data on conflict risk, feeding our foreign policy engagements. Our conflict forecasting models also include climate indicators like temperature change or drought exposure. Also, we constantly work to expand our multilateral approach in the area of early warning and conflict prevention. This is why the EU sees CRAFT as a key instrument to foster data ecosystems that help us better anticipate, prevent, and respond to crises. We are therefore very glad to be, along with our member states, among the founding partners of the fund. And the fact that the Foreign Policy Instrument Service of the European Commission have mobilized with us since day one on supporting CRAFT shows our collective commitment and trust in the initiative. I wish all of you fruitful exchanges in today's discussions. Thank you.
In our final segment, we're going to tackle the hard part, finding the financial resources and political will to accomplish the goals we've discussed, having the data tools to reduce global risk. I'm welcoming back Dr. Compradero and Ian Bremer. They were fabulous in Group 1. And this is the United Nations. It is UNGA Week. People are on the move, there's security lines, so we will soon be joined, we hope, by World Bank Director Axel van Trottenberg and UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed, whose studio this is, but they are working their way through. So, Ian, we've been here for 40 minutes. We've talked about the world's problems. We have talked about a lot of stuff. We have not talked about one thing that matters, China. Explain to me right now, or explain to the viewers, where the relationship between the United States and China is, very briefly, where it's going, and how the various options will affect all the problems we've been discussing.
Well, a biggest issue, I suppose, is that China is really distracted by very significant domestic economic challenges. And that has put real constraints, material constraints, on their foreign policy strategy over the long term, whether you're talking about financing Belt and Road development and infrastructure all over the world, and some of the lowest developed countries around the world are really facing that, or whether it's China's ability to drive the kind of expenditure on military growth in Asia. And Americans definitely are feeling a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more confident. They don't have to worry about the Chinese century, and maybe there's some space that confrontation isn't going to break out. Certainly, President Biden feels that way, and we are going to see a bilateral meeting. It hasn't been officially announced, but it's certainly going to happen at APEC in November, which will be in San Francisco. And Biden is the one person that has been saying consistently, we want to put a floor under this relationship. Well, Xi Jinping isn't looking for significant conflict. In fact, I would say that the Chinese response to the Americans changing the status quo on export controls for semiconductors, on military exercises, has been, we'll respond, but we'll respond at a slightly lower level than the Americans are hitting us, because we don't want escalation. Certainly, Chinese concerns about their own resilience and strength is a big piece of that equation.
So your odds of escalation are declining. You think we're actually, it may not be a better place, but it may be a more stable place?
Yeah, I would not say that the U.S.-China is going to come out of this meeting with a breakthrough kumbaya moment. I mean, there is definitely the de-risking is the term of art. Right. And that means that the Americans are spending more in the USA and with friends and with the Indians and Southeast Asians. And Biden just went to Vietnam and brought those bilateral relations up to the level of China-Vietnam, which the Americans may not care much about. Vietnam is critical for China, right? So all of this news plays. What I'm saying is I actually think that the relationship is no longer in free fall. Right. It's a little more stable. It's a little more grippy than it was 6 months, 12 months ago, at least for the near term. That's what I'm saying. We can take a bit of a pause here. We can have a breath, and that's a useful thing.
Well, as we say in media, decline is the new up.
So. Yes, indeed. That is absolutely true.
I'm trying to figure that out.
The economics of my industry are
not great.
Been just fabulous ever since I joined. Dr. Arrow, to what degree does the potential for increasing stability in the U.S.-China dynamic affect your world, your work, and the way that you handle global crises?
Look, we always said, and thank you for asking, and I agree with you in the way in which you characterize the moment, and I think Biden has spent a great deal of his time trying to lower the temperature as well. The cooperate, collaborate, and there will be competition, and marrying all those three together, as you say, it's an art, not a science as well. I mean, it's very true, and it's been very clear to us that the US-China competition overshadows everything else. And one of the things that we've been worried about, Nick, is that whether you'll see an accident happening in the backyard where both of them are interested, where both of them are competing, where both of them are trying to seek influence. We've always said that we were concerned about how geopolitics was making more brittle the system, making it very difficult to cooperate, especially in areas where you think they ought to cooperate. So, for example, in somewhere like the Africa continent, you're seeing more competition, more tension, trying to play one up the other. So, for example, how you view the BRICS, although Jake Sullivan did not necessarily see the expansion of the BRIC countries as something to worry about. Most people saw it as symbolic. I would argue that China sort of gained from the BRICS as opposed to a number of the other countries as well. But I would say that at this current moment, The geopolitics of China, US is one set of variable, but there are other geopolitics. There's other competition within the regions, between the regions, and we're seeing increasing regionalisms where superpowers, major powers in those regions have their own sets of competition that can be affected or not by or influenced and shaped by US-China competition.
Of these different dynamics, Ian, which do you think is the most important to watch or the most underappreciated?
Or the latter is the more interesting question, actually, because this is the one time in the year where the Americans actually are face-to-face with the global south.
Exactly.
It otherwise doesn't happen. There was just the G77 meeting in Havana, but now they're all here. And the Chinese are not. In fact, most of the permanent 5 members of the Security Council didn't show up at the head of state level, only the Americans' home turf. Look, what we're hearing from the global south, and we're hearing it all week long, is they are mistrustful and they're angry. They feel like their agenda is kind of irrelevant, that they are the takers, not in any way the collaborators or makers on the rule space and how we're going to deal with global governance challenges. We saw that coming off of the pandemic. I mean, I've had several conversations with heads of state this week that are saying, you Americans, you did not provide us with any vaccines. You didn't allow us to get the prime materials for the vaccines while vaccines were rotting on your own shelves. They are deeply worried about the inflation that has come on the back of the Russia-Ukraine war that they're being asked to support the American and democratic position on, but they're the ones that are facing the challenges at home economically. And they're deeply worried, of course, about climate change, that they are getting hit for the hardest, but the Americans and other wealthy countries have not actually made good on their initial pledges. So that's where I think it's underappreciated, that the global south is, for 50 years, the global south was at least in part buying a story that we're building a global middle class and that they'll benefit from globalization and we'll all be part of the same boat. That is absolutely not the story at the UN General Assembly this week.
So what's of concern to me is how does the global majority use this moment to its advantage as well? So you're right, a number of the leaders, welcome DSG, it's really great to see you. A number of the global leaders from the so-called global south, I would call them the global majority, are right to put a spotlight on the inequalities, on the injustice as well. But what is the strategy that accompanies that grievance? What is the strategy that accompanies that frustration? So I think what I would like to see is that as you criticize, as you question, the efficiencies, the effectiveness of international institutions, of the US, of the West, what is your strategy to ensure that this moment addresses the needs of your people on the ground?
Which is hard because there's so little cohesion among that group.
Exactly, exactly.
All right, well, wonderful. We have Melinda Bohannon, the Deputy Secretary General. Welcome. Thank you for allowing us to hang out in your house here, and thank you for joining us on stage.
It's a great house, very green.
It's really quite gorgeous. And Axel, welcome on stage. So happy to have you here. Amina, let's begin with you here. We are halfway through the quest to get to the Sustainable Development Goals. What are you most excited about, and where do we need to do the most work?
Most excited about that we have so many people in the building. Stakeholders have come, governments have come. The one meeting where you can have an interaction and engagement, catch up on what we're doing. The story and the data is not very good, but the hope and the solutions and the can-do spirit is here. So I'm excited about what we take out of the UN General Assembly in terms of the partnerships and the scaling up and the sense of urgency and determination to, okay, we've got to get this done in the second half.
So you're feeling a sense of urgency. Are you feeling, we were just discussing a sense that, wait a second, not that many of the top leaders from the Security Council are here. The Global South feels like it's been rather left behind. You're feeling this dynamic here?
Certainly the dynamics there. You have 4 of the 5 of our, P5 not here, but there are 180 odd other leaders here. And that's a huge momentum. That's leadership, that's leaning in, that's partnering. We've got a lot of business in the House, foundations and other stakeholders. And that's what this global family is about. I think the few that are missing will catch up. But we're moving. I think the 2030 agenda is urgent. And we really do just feel that there is a movement to make that happen. There's a sense of determination that we're not going to get this let us down. Too many people at stake, too many.
Axel, so we've spent the last 45 minutes in this conversation talking about early warning systems. We've talked about digital exclusion. We've talked about people who don't have access to the internet. We've talked about the need for data to help us counter the crisis that we're seeing. But let me ask you the economics of that. How are we going to be able to pay to get digital access for the world? How are we going to be able to pay to build the infrastructure that will feed in data about climate, that will get satellite early warning systems, that will let us understand croplands? How is that going to play out over the next couple of years?
Well, I think there I'm more optimistic, particularly in the digital realm. I think we need to build big coalitions with the private sector that can be done. But for example, in Africa, the African Union has taken decisions on the digitalization. We are involved on this. I think we need to scale this massively. And I think it is doable. And you see in countries like Kenya, that have very sophisticated payment systems, sometimes better than in OECD countries. So I think that we need to see that there is a huge potential. We need to do a lot more. And then there is the second one is on systems, for data systems, so that you can improve decision making. I think the UN has traditionally pushed hard in many areas. We are partnering in many areas. I think clearly we need to make sure that countries have the appropriate systems in place. But for example, this COVID crisis has left also huge gaps. Take, for example, poverty. In most of the low-income countries, there are no household surveys for the last 5 or longer years. So I think we need to accelerate it, provide then a good picture where we can have better interventions. But I agree with also with Amina that here, if you wish to see it, the political setting is provided for the stimulus package. And we hope that this is then carried forward also in multilateral development banks like the World Bank at the annual meetings, that we give that another push. So we need to put that ambition from all angles, political, financial, economic, and build that coalition.
Wonderful. I want to raise a point. Vilas Dhar made it a few minutes ago, and we were talking about artificial intelligence. And he said, look, the world's conversations about data, ethics in data, about data ownership, about digital inclusion, they're all broken. But now we have this moment. We have this huge, shiny thing. We are now all talking and focused on artificial intelligence. Now is the moment where we're going to solve all those problems about data and democracy. I'm going to go to the Deputy Secretary General. Is that correct? Do we have a wonderful reset moment because of AI and we're going to solve these problems that have so vexed us for decades?
I think we do have a reset moment, but we've had many reset moments. So the leadership that really stands up to push this forward, we put on the table frameworks, solutions, and most recently into the digital compact that we put on the table to say we need guardrails around this because the potentials are huge, but so is the dark side. I mean, we have to all have common ground that this is an amazing opportunity, but we can lose it if we don't get together and push forward the very basics that are needed to protect everyone and to close the divides. It is the moment, I believe, in history where we could leapfrog those divides. Mm-hmm. We don't have to wait to be ready for technology. It's already here. How are we going to engage with it? If you can't get ahead of it, get abreast of it. If we have an education transformation, what's the role of the new teacher? If we're talking about multilateralism, what is that new diplomat going to look like? Anything that we did in 1945, 75 years later, shelf life is over. Now we have to get real and engage with that. Have a transformative mindset that says we're not afraid to have more. This is not less. And it seems to me that in many of the conversations we have, it's about what it's taking away rather than what it's giving. It's about a global north and a global south. It's about we. And we're connected now. We're never going to be disconnected again. It's whether we're connected for the good of it or not. The frameworks are here. The SDGs are brilliant. I don't know anyone that argues with them. Sometimes we say there are too many, but too much. But, you know, really, who are you going to tell in the world that you've got it all, but they can't have it? These are basic things. So I feel there is a moment here, and out of every crisis and misery, we should be able to break back. And it is about a different kind of leadership that is going to come through, because I think leadership today in the world is taxed. As my Secretary General says, where there is leadership, there's not much power. And where there is power, that leadership is struggling. It's struggling to bring the world along with them.
Well, you could not possibly have a better final thought than that. You timed it perfectly. Thank you so much. Amina Mohammed, Axel Van Trottenberg, Ian Bremmer, Comfort Era, thank you so much. And that concludes this hour at the United Nations. Many thanks to the UN for hosting this conversation, to our partners, Complex Risk Analytics Fund, Early Warnings for All, and GZERO Media. I'm Nicholas Thompson. For all of us here, thanks for watching and have a great day.